Welcome everyone to Building with Draconious. This is a series of instructions for players who have acquired the basic concepts of the game, along with harvested needed materials, established their claim, and are ready to begin their journey to familiarize themselves with the incredible building potential Landmark has to offer.
Okay, Draconious, so when most people start out like me as a new player, my perceptions, of course, is to build something. So first I'm going to start with the selection tool. Then I'm just going to put it here on the space, and then I'm going to hold down my control button so that I can bring it up off the ground. And then I'm going to add a material to it. Using the add tool, click, and add. Now that I've created this default cube, I know for myself and maybe even for other players, we kind of consider this to be a voxel, but in reality, it's not, correct?
Correct. It's not a voxel. It's actually a shape that represents the locations of 8 voxels. And when you start looking at this, if you look at if you count the corners, there's 8 corners to that shape. Each corner is a voxel. And then between that connect the 2 corners, the edge of that cube is a line which is called a vector. If you want to come over here, I set up a default voxel, and what I did was colored the one side. We'll get into that later on, but this is for demonstration only. That side there is the pane of the voxel. It always has 4 voxels on it to make up that shape on the one pane, and every shape has 6 panes to it.
Okay, so if we put that blue on each area of this cube, it would be 6.
Correct.
Hi, Draconious. So many of us who begin this building process go through a great deal of trial and error, and we know of people that have actually pushed the envelope of this building process, which we often refer to as voxelmancy. So for the purposes of this training program, we kind of want to familiarize people with the direct links to building. In other words, kind of skip over some of the trial and error aspects and just kind of go straight to the necessities that they would need to really be an effective builder.
Correct. I mean, you can go out and do a couple builds to get comfortable with the tools. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to get started on building some really good builds and stuff, as far as what people consider, and to me every build is good because they're from your imagination, but nonetheless, you'll want to get yourself a tool set together, and especially with the shapes we are limited to from the default tools, you have to rework that shape a lot of times to get the shape that you desire to achieve the certain effect in your build. So in order to do that, you're going to eventually need a build board, a voxel board. A lot of them are out there, but what tends to happen is the board is confusing to the person that's going to use it if they didn't make it themselves. So with this course or lesson, what we're going to do is build a board together. The starting scale of just the standard voxel and go all the way up to the present roaming voxels that we are using today.
So if I understand you correctly, essentially what we're doing is we know that the tools currently have certain limitations and the developers are constantly working on those. And you guys like yourself making these boards and so forth are actually helping the building process. So by building this board, or what you're going to teach me to do, you're going to provide me with the tools necessary to kind of sometimes overcome those boundaries or limitations until those tools can be introduced into the game.
Correct. I mean, they've already introduced things to the tools that make life easier, that started off with techniques that we've discovered and workarounds, others might call it, to achieve those final shapes. So I have lots of faith that tools like Voxel Shaper will come out down the road, and then we won't be using voxel reactors. But until then, we're going to be using those.
You mentioned something that has been kind of newly discovered, and that's roaming vectors. So what we want our audience to learn from this beginning series or this beginning introductory program is defining your terms. So what I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm going to segue into Dave Jurgensen's outline and terms of what voxel characteristics are.
The link to Dave's outline can be found in the published section below. In our series, we want to stay as close to the terms Dave has defined. This first segment in our series is really to supply you guys with the knowledge you'll need as we move forward with the lessons. We want to be as thorough as possible, however we know questions will arise, so you're welcome to post your questions in the comments sections, or you can contact Draconious in-game. If you'd like for us to cover a specific technique, or if you have a question about an aspect of building, feel free to let us know, and perhaps we'll cover it in the show.
Now that we've had the opportunity to look over Dave's outline, give us an idea of what we're going to be creating on this board that is going to help us with our build.
Well, to start off with, we're just going to start making from our default cube, the one I just colored red. We're going to go and smooth them out to make our smaller set. And then we can use those to get the complementary larger set on that same scale. And then right above it, Dave Jurgensen talked about it as anti-voxel strings. What they are, if you look at that one compared to its brother and right below it, it's just that it meets the walls or the panes of that cube shape. So, and these are what I consider align strings because they align back up to the top. And these are just the plates that are the complementary plates when you use those in a reactor, which you'll learn through this course as well. Right above it, we have these sets up here. These are roaming vectors. And this is the base shapes. The yellow bar in the center there, in the backdrop where I just colored red, that there marks where the ownership of the voxels are, in comparison to the graphic that is extended past it. Each of those shapes up there are only actually one voxel. And then above that are those same shapes, but, oops, I'll grab one there, like these ones up there, are the same shapes but smoothed out. And again, the yellow bar in the background here makes up where the ownership of that shape is to the left.
Okay, can you explain what ownership means? What is the ownership?
Okay, and just to clarify with ownership, when we're always talking about voxels directly, when we're not talking about the actual who placed the voxel as an ownership of placement or of IP over the voxel. Ownership in the lesson will consider where the actual data is stored of the voxel on the roaming vector. Down the road, as we go through the course, you'll get to understand how the data is stored at one point, and then it borrows a voxel, its neighboring voxels, corner locations, and can stretch its vector, which is that line, out to that voxel. But it will not affect the neighboring voxel of that borrowed voxel. Now, a lot of that just doesn't jive right now. Don't worry, we'll be going over that down the road.
So essentially, too, I think is something that that I recently learned or became aware of as I built, was that everything in the environment, anything that you're affecting, is actually involved with something else. In other words, like even though it looks like air, it's actually something there interacting with what you're doing, right?
Correct. The whole environment is already a mesh. We're running through it. Right now, you can consider that we're running through voxels of air. Just as much as we can see voxel water through it and run through it, it doesn't have a collider, so our characters can run through that material. Air is the same way, but we can't see it. So you don't really see the air out there, but every object that you make affects the air voxels that are around it.
All right, Draconious, now to illustrate what we were just discussing, how everything in the world has volume to it, can you give us a demonstration and illustrate what it is that you were trying to say as far as how everything interacts with one another?
Yeah, because the one thing a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that the air that we run through is voxels as well. They're air voxels. When you open up your selection tool, you can pull it out, and this is a good representation of the skeleton of the grid right now, until a shape's put in there. And if we were to put a shape in there, what I'll do here is I'll put a small micro. Let me just put a selection box around it. And you can see it rests inside one of those squares. But if we were to put a normal voxel beside it, she has to meet up to that line again. So that line on that grid is very important because everything is defined by that line and where that other shape is within that line, if it's going to be pulled to it or not. But without that air voxel beside it, that micro voxel can't exist. Okay, now that we quickly just touched down on air, there's going to be a lot more about that as we go on. I don't expect you to completely understand that right now, but you will after you get done with this board. So what we can do now is just move along to explaining some of the other stuff on here. So in this next section here, if what I'm looking at is one of these full sections here, I'll just color it. That in itself is called a reactor. And what's important about that is the 8 corner voxel locations. This shows those locations so you can visually tell exactly where that piece is in the center. And with these 4 reactors I have up here, they mark special offset string locations, which we'll go over once we get to that part of the board. But I just wanted to let you know what was sitting there. And then next to that, you'll see here there is these little tiny inverted, or these little tiny pieces here. These are inverted voxels. Those are very advanced stuff that we'll be taking lesson in later on in the course as well when we go to build this board. Over here too, I left some blank space. This board hasn't even been completed on my end yet, so as we go we'll be completing even some of these empty locations here, because what I do is I like to find some of the key locations. And in this reactor here that's by itself, that one there is position 128, because voxel has 256 pixels across it. So when we push it over a half a voxel to its max location on the outside, that's moving over 128 positions. That's why we call this one 128. And then these 3 reactors here on the end are very useful because these 3 here mark the absolute 0 of the shape location. So the bottom one is the center, the absolute center of the cube shape. And then the one above it is the aligned center, so the center on the pane on either side of the shape. And then the one above that goes out to the maximum center that the normal voxel could be. And those are great for just having a center mark, which if you've done any construction, you know how useful having center is, or knowing that you have center.
We hope you enjoyed this introduction to building with Draconious. In future shows, we'll be covering aspects of this overview in more detail. Rest assured, we have some amazing concepts, visual aids, and illustrations that will bring a lot more meaning and provide you with the tools you'll need to become a better builder. You can catch Draconious every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time during Evil's Twitchcast as they conduct live building lessons. A link to her information can be found in the published section below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Be sure you hit that like button, share my channel on your favorite social media, and make especially sure you subscribe so you'll have all the latest news on Landmark.